We'll begin with a request for bill introductions. Are there any bill introductions? I do have one. It is 26 RS 2974, and this compels the Secretary of DCF to comply with data requests from federal agencies. Is there any objection? Seeing none? We have with us today, always a wonderful presentation from our legislative post audit, and this is on reviewing free lunch student counts used as the basis for at-risk funding. We have Heidi Zimmerman, and tomorrow committee we have a hearing on a bill that deals with this very issue, so I thought this would be a great way to lay the foundation for that bill hearing. So Heidi, welcome to committee.
Thank you. Good morning. I am Heidi Zimmerman. I'm a principal auditor at Legislative Post Audit, and I am here today to present the free lunch audit that we actually released last summer. The audit has one question, which is on page 2, and that question is, does the number of free lunch students used for at-risk funding accurately reflect the number of students who are eligible for the program? So I'm going to give you a very short answer, and then I'm going to give you a very long answer. But the short answer is that the number of free lunch students used for determining at-risk funding appears to be significantly more than the number of students who may be eligible for the free lunch program. So for the much longer version, I'm going to start with a little background, which is on page 3. The National School Lunch Program is a federal program that reimburses school districts for meals that they serve to students. The United States Department of Agriculture administers the program. The USDA reimburses participating schools for each lunch that they serve. Then in exchange, schools must offer free and reduced priced lunches to students who qualify. So students can receive a free lunch if they meet one of several criteria. So first, I'm on page 4. The student participates in certain federal programs. So this includes programs like TANF, SNAP, and Medicaid. The student is a migrant, runaway, in foster care, or experiencing homelessness. All of those students qualify for free lunch. The students who attend a school that participate in the community eligibility provision of the National School Lunch Program. I'll talk a little more about what that program is here in a minute. And then those students who have a parent or guardian who submit an application that reports that their total household income is at or less than 130% of the federal poverty line for its size. All of those students are eligible as well. And then students receive a reduced price lunch if the student's total household income is between 130 and 185% of the federal poverty line. This audit, though, only pertains to free lunch students. So in Kansas, the free lunch count is connected to at-risk funding. So in Kansas, the state provides at-risk funding to school districts, and the funding is largely allocated based on the number of students in the district who are eligible for a free lunch. So state statute and Department of Education rules require students who are eligible for a free lunch to also meet some additional criteria, and those are on the top of page 5. Next, I'm going to go through the various processes by which students qualify for free lunch. So first, students who meet certain criteria are automatically eligible to receive a free lunch. Generally, these students are not required to submit an application to receive this benefit. Instead, state agencies and school districts use a process called direct certification to determine which students are automatically eligible to receive a free lunch. In Kansas, there are several groups of students who are directly certified and in multiple ways. So first of all, the Department for Children and Families compiles a list of students who receive federal benefits, including SNAP, TANF, and Medicaid, and students who are in foster care. DCF reports those students in a system that KSDE operates, and then school districts can access that system and see which students should automatically receive a free lunch. So with the exception of students in foster care, if at least one student in the household is on that list, then free lunch is extended to all the students in the household. Additionally, school district officials verify that other groups of students are automatically eligible. So that includes students experiencing homelessness, runaways, and migrant students. So if the district determines that a student meets the criteria for one of those designations, then that student is automatically eligible to receive a free lunch. So students who meet these criteria can receive free lunch for the whole year, plus 30 food operating days into the next school year. And food operating days just means days that the school serves a lunch. It's about 6 weeks into the next year. Students who are directly certified for free lunches are counted in the at-risk funding counts. So students who are on the 30-day carryover period on September 20th are counted in the at-risk funding count, even if they do not qualify after that 30-day period. The percentage of free lunch students who are directly certified has increased significantly, from 46% in the 2021 school year to 79% in the 2024 school year. So for students who are not directly certified, a parent or guardian can submit a National School Lunch Program application to the school to determine eligibility for a free lunch. So school district officials use the household income information on that application to determine whether the student may receive a free lunch. And USDA rules require the district to consider only the information on that application when making the determination. In the 24 school year, an estimated 16% of students who qualified for a free lunch did so by submitting a National School Lunch application. Then there's one additional way to qualify for free lunch. That is, the community eligibility provision allows eligible schools to provide free lunches to all enrolled students. So to be eligible for the community eligibility provision, the school must have at least 25% of its students eligible for free lunch through direct certification in that previous year. The schools that participate in community eligibility provide all of their students with a free lunch. This includes students who would otherwise not qualify. These students are not required to submit an application to receive the benefit. KSDE, though, asks students who attend community eligibility schools but who are not directly certified to complete a household economic survey to determine at-risk funding counts. This is because the department only counts students whose household income is 130% or less of the federal poverty line in the at-risk funding count. The department uses the household economic survey to identify which students meet that criteria. And the Appendix C, which is on page 27, has an example of what that survey looks like. Now, this is a much smaller group of students. Only about 4% of free lunch qualified students submitted a household economic survey in 2024. And next, I'm going to talk about the verification work that we did, and I'm on page 8. So we reviewed information for 769 randomly selected students who qualified for a free lunch in the 2024 school year. The students in our sample were a mix of students whose household provided a school lunch application or a household economic survey, and also students who were directly certified. And we requested documentation for each student from the student's school district. So that random sample of students included 122 students across 55 districts who qualified for a free lunch because they submitted an application. This sample is large enough to be statistically valid for projecting the results to the whole population. We used information from that application to find income tax information for the household from the Kansas Department of Revenue. When we could not find income tax information, we looked for quarterly wage information from the Department of Labor, and we reviewed the income information we could find and determined if the household met the free lunch income requirements for their household size. So we reviewed 122 applications, but could not find any income information for 14 applicants. In some cases, the application did not provide enough information for us to locate those individuals. Usually it's because there was not a Social Security number. In other cases, we did have enough information, but we still couldn't find the individual in either revenue or labor system. This could be because they didn't submit a tax return, or they had employers who did not properly submit their wage information. So the figure on page 11 shows the results of the income verification work for the 108 individuals that we could find. So as the figure shows, 68 applications did not appear to meet the income eligibility for free lunch. So this means the financial information that we could find exceeded the income threshold for the size of that household. 45 of the ineligible applicants had incomes that were at least 50% over the income threshold. So for about half of those applicants, they had incomes greater than $100,000 in the year that their student received free lunch. 2 of them had incomes greater than $200,000. We projected the results from the sample to the whole population of students who qualified for a free lunch by submitting an application. We estimate that between 54% to 72% of all applicants were likely ineligible for a free lunch. That's about 18,400 students to about 24,600 students. This work represents a 95% confidence interval. So that means there is a 95% likelihood that the ineligibility percentage for all applications is within this range. I would like to make a quick note here that we've done this work before. We've done this audit before, several years ago. We used a slightly different method in that audit when we did the work previously, but at that time we estimated about 23,000 students were not eligible in that audit. So 2 audits across about 18 years, slightly different methodologies, produced very, very consistent results. There are a few really important caveats about this work, though. So first, and I'm on page 11. So first of all, the application is a snapshot in time, while the income tax returns and wage information include earnings for the whole year. So that means that it is possible that a student was eligible for a free lunch at the time the application was filed, even if the household's total income for the year exceeded the threshold. Second, the ineligibility percentage is not the same as a fraud rate. So fraud requires willful deception. And although it is likely that some may falsify their information in order to get a free lunch, it's also likely that there are some errors here. And genuine human error is typically not considered fraud. And then third, our estimate only applies to students who were qualified by income, which is about 16% of the total free lunch population. So out of that random sample of students, there were 32 submitted a household economic survey in the 24 school year, and we tried to verify those in the same way that we verified the school lunch applications. However, we were only able to verify half of those surveys. For 16 of the 32 surveys, we could not find any tax or wage earnings at revenue or labor. But out of the 16 surveys we could evaluate, 9 of them did not appear eligible for free lunch. Keep in mind, though, that students who attend community eligible schools will receive a free lunch no matter what. So when we say they're not eligible, what we mean is they're not eligible by income, which means they wouldn't be eligible to be counted for the at-risk funding count, but they will still receive a free lunch no matter what. We could not find income information for enough of these students to project the results to the whole population who submitted that survey. Nevertheless, the results do raise some concerns. For students who were directly certified, we could not verify whether they were accurately determined to be eligible. These students do not submit an application, so they do not provide income information to the school district. Instead, eligibility for most of these students is determined by KDHE and DCF when the family applies for programs like SNAP or Medicaid. So due to time and some data constraints, we could not determine whether those agencies accurately assess eligibility for TANF and SNAP and Medicaid. Further, some directly certified students are determined by their school district, and we could not evaluate whether all the districts made those determinations correctly. So what this means is that the high percentage of automatically eligible students means the overall accuracy of the free lunch count is difficult to assess. This is because decision-making related to free lunch eligibility is dispersed among multiple state agencies and 285 school districts. Ultimately, much of the accuracy of the free lunch count depends on whether state agencies and school districts accurately approve individuals for their respective programs. The other analysis we did evaluating the free lunch count involved looking at the number of students who could be eligible for a free lunch but did not apply. So it's just kind of the other side of the coin here. I'm on page 14. So we reviewed data from the U.S. Census Bureau's American Community Survey. We used data from that survey to estimate the number of Kansas public school students whose incomes were 130% or less of the federal poverty line. And we then backed out certain populations of students that we know did apply. So based on that estimate, we estimated that up to 3,200 students who were likely eligible for a free lunch did not submit an application for one. Even though there were about 3,200 students who may have been eligible and didn't submit an application, we did find many more students who qualified but likely were not actually eligible. So what this all means is that in the 24 school year, the state may have overpaid in at-risk funding. So after accounting for the 3,200 students who may have been eligible but didn't apply, the state likely overpaid by about $38 million to $53 million in the 24 school year. We also looked at the districts and KSDE's verification efforts to try to understand why we saw some of the issues that we saw. And I'm on page 16 now. So school districts and KSDE are very limited in their ability to verify the accuracy of DCF's direct certification list. So DCF compiles a list of students who should be directly certified because they receive SNAP, TANF, Medicaid, or in foster care. And department officials told us they do not have the necessary information to verify that DCF compiled that list accurately. Additionally, there is nothing the districts can do to ensure that DCF compiled that list accurately. Federal rules significantly limit school districts' ability to verify household income for the students who apply through a national school lunch application. Per federal rule, when a family submits a national school lunch program application, the school district must make an initial determination of eligibility based solely on the information provided on that application. Generally, federal rules require districts to verify eligibility for only a very small percentage of the total approved applications. So the district must verify either 3% of applications or 3,000 applications, whichever is less. In Kansas, most school districts, it's 3%. So district officials review supporting documentation to verify that families' reported income is accurate. District staff review that submitted documentation, and they determine if the student is still eligible. However, districts do not have any way of verifying this information outside of the documentation that the applicant provides. Additionally, although KSDE auditors review several aspects of the National School Lunch Program applications, they also cannot independently verify the household income parents report. There is simply no system in place that would allow department auditors to take this step. The districts and KSDE auditors also review the household economic surveys, but again, they cannot independently verify the reported income. So to wrap up here, I've given you a lot of information, but here's some really important takeaways from this audit. So first of all, much of the accuracy of the free lunch count is based on whether agencies such as KDHE and DCF accurately make eligibility decisions. If there is fraud or other errors in determining eligibility for those programs, it is likely to have an impact on free lunch eligibility. Second, household income on the National School Lunch Program application is self-reported, and generally USDA does not permit the districts to verify more than 3% of applications. Further, KSDE also has no way to independently verify the income on the applications, and programs that operate almost entirely on self-reported income with few verification efforts are inherently at high risk of fraud, waste, and abuse. And then last, most of the risks that we identified are related to the rules that USDEA has created for the National School Lunch Program. So KSDE and the districts have very little ability to correct the problems that create the highest risk for this program. So that concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to stand for any questions.
Heidi, thank you so much, and a lot of information there for the committee. What questions do we have for the auditor? Senator Thompson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Heidi. It seems like where and maybe I'm wrong, I've always, because I saw this audit before when you presented it in post-audit, it's been a while, the community eligibility provision where the schools must have at least 25% of the students eligible, but all students then in that school would be eligible for a free lunch if it meets that threshold. Or how many schools in Kansas qualify under that, and how much? I mean, it seems to me like there would be a lot of fudge factor there to where families who are not eligible are receiving free lunch. Am I correct in that?
About 3/4 of the schools in the state are eligible for the program, but only 13% of them actually participate. And there's a lot of decision-making that goes into whether or not you want to be a community eligibility school, because the reimbursement rates are slightly different. You have to serve breakfast. Comes with some other rules. So districts have to make a decision whether or not that financially makes sense for them. And most of them don't. So only about 13% are actually community eligible schools. And so, like I said, you have to have that 25% of your kids have to be direct certified in the previous year to be considered to be eligible for that community eligibility provision.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
So just to follow up on that, Heidi, so let me understand this correctly. If you're a CEP, every child, and it goes by school building, correct? Not district?
you know?
I think it's by building,
I
not
think it is by building, yes.
by building. So every student in that building could get breakfast and lunch, correct? But districts aren't doing this because they would maybe not get as much money reimbursed. So therefore, some students may not get a free breakfast or lunch. Am I understanding that correctly?
Every student in a community eligibility school gets at least a free lunch. I'm not sure what the breakfast rules are. We didn't look at the breakfast rules for this audit. But every student in a community eligibility provision school gets a free lunch, regardless of whether or not they would have qualified otherwise. So just matter of course, everybody gets a free meal.
And that would cover, you said, 3/4?
3/4 of the schools in the state
The schools in the state could already,
could do that. They qualify, or at least they qualified in 2024. Only 13% of them actually did it, though.
interesting, because we continue to hear about, let's provide free meals to all these kids. Well, they already have a program, but it sounds like districts aren't opting into that for whatever reason. So that's interesting. Committee, what other questions? Senator Holscher, then Senator Shane.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you so much for being here. On page 10, there's a couple of examples of families that are over the threshold. Is it possible that potentially when maybe they filled out the paperwork or whatever for the free lunch, that then their life situation changed by the time of the audit?
Yeah, and that was kind of one of the caveats that I talked about, which is the application is a snapshot in time. So you go in, you say, this is my situation right now. And maybe somebody just lost a job and you are not, you don't qualify in that moment. Even though when we looked at the tax returns or the wage information, you may have been over the threshold when we looked at that because that's for the whole year. And so there is a little bit of a mismatch there. And we do note that as a caveat, that is possible. One is a snapshot and very situational. One is looking at kind of your situation for the whole year.
Senator Shane.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So how is it that we know the USDA would not permit verification of more than 3%? Has there actually been a state or districts that have sought to verify more than 3% that were told no? Is that dependent on the administration? I guess walk us through that a little bit.
I think I've been looking at free lunch for almost 20 years, and typically the federal government, especially with this program, has been resistant to allowing school districts to do more than the rules set up. Now, that may be an administrative thing. It could be that over time that changes. It could be that there's a loophole somewhere. But generally speaking, the federal government has not been amenable to allowing districts to do more than the rules allow, except in the case of cause. So school districts for cause can review an application. They can say, we think something's not right here. We want you to bring some documentation in to support your application. When a district does that for cause, it does not count against their 3%. But they do need cause. And there are some specific things that are considered cause and some things that are not.
Would the federal government view the funds provided through at-risk waiting, which are predominantly tied to free and reduced lunch, as a separate interest from the actual provisioning of meals through the school lunch program?
I don't work for the federal government. I cannot say with absolute certainty, but if it doesn't, at-risk funding is a state issue, a state program. If it's not attached to free lunch, the federal government may feel very differently about this because it's not their program. And so potentially if you're verifying for at-risk funding only, and you are not verifying for free lunch eligibility, USDA may feel differently about that.
Thank you.
Senator Alley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Going back to if a student qualifies for free lunch, then they're carried over until the next year on the September 20th or whatever that date was. If they don't qualify after that September 20th, but are they still, is the school still getting weightings for at-risk for that student?
Yes. If the student is eligible on September 20th, so say the student is on that 30-day carryover, and that 30-day carryover does usually cover September 20th because it's about 6 weeks. If that student is still eligible because they're on 30-day carryover, then that student is counted for at-risk funding, even if afterwards they do not qualify. State law says September 20th, that's the day. If you're eligible on September 20th, you get counted. If you're not, you don't.
And so with that, that's not a fraud, that's not an abuse, that's a rule.
That is the way the statute
Counted.
allows it to be, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Heidi, I do have one. On page 19, I'm trying to make sense, and I don't know if you can help us make sense of this or not, but the U.S. Census Bureau, the numbers they get for predicting poverty at the same levels as we qualify free and reduced lunches for, there's a huge discrepancy, obviously. And that's a 90% confidence interval on this census. Do we know why more than double, or nearly double, we have nearly double the number of kids on free and reduced lunches as what the census would estimate there to be?
Right. So the census estimates at 100% of the poverty line, and it does not actually estimate at 130. So we had to estimate what that 130% might look like. And so we estimated about 92,000 public school students. And we were able to look at public school. We were able to make this mathematically some distinction between public school and kids who maybe aren't in public school. So about 92,000 public school students were living in a household that had an income of 130% or less based on census numbers. We're seeing 198,000 students on free lunch, which is supposed to be at 130% of the free 130% of the poverty level. There are a number of reasons that could happen. One is that the 198,000 is simply not correct. That number is inflated. That's a possibility. The other side of it is that the census is simply missing large numbers of people. We know that the census does have some difficulty catching people in poverty. That is a group it misses. Although based on the work we did, it probably underestimates that group by maybe 5%. So that probably doesn't account for the significant discrepancy we saw. We can tell you we saw this discrepancy. We can give you a little hint as to why a little bit of that discrepancy might exist, but I cannot explain the entire discrepancy between the census and the free lunch counts.
Well, if the proxy or the way to qualify is either you're on a benefit, so you automatically qualify, or you fill out the application, or you're in a district that has you qualify as foster care, then something has to be off in reporting or how those people are becoming eligible. I mean, that's the only explanation, is it not?
We did look at the federal programs because direct certification covers Medicaid, TANF, and SNAP, to look and see maybe the issue is that those programs have a wildly different threshold for eligibility than maybe free lunch does. What we found is that it didn't actually. TANF is about 30% of federal, SNAP is around 130%, Medicaid's a little more complicated, but it's about 130%. And so that it's probably not that those programs have very different standards for getting in. Community eligibility, now the only kids counted in that 198,000 are those who submitted a household economic survey and were at 130% or less based on what they reported on that survey. So it's not the community eligibility, it's not that community eligibility is just covering every student in the district and that's jacking up the numbers. That's not the issue either. We just don't, I mean, there are a lot of possibilities here. There could be lots of error It could be that there's lots of error in free lunch. There could be fraud in free lunch. There could be errors or fraud in SNAP, TANF, Medicaid. There are so many programs going on here that feed into free lunch. The errors or problems, any type of problem, in any one of several programs could make these numbers inflate to a degree that doesn't make sense. We don't know which of those things it is.
Well, we know the SNAP error rate, so. Senator Alley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm trying to get my hands around the numbers, and I'm having a difficulty with this. So please help me. I may be wrong. I hope I'm wrong. But if the dollars that we get for the free lunch are about $4.50 a lunch. Is that correct?
The reimbursement rate,
Yes.
that's probably about right. I think.
Okay, so if
might
we
note-
use that number times your number that you just gave, 198,000 students, we're looking at $890,000. That's, I mean, I'm not asking you to do the math. That's,
Yeah,
it's just what it said.
425 to 435 per lunch served
Okay.
to a student who qualifies for a free lunch. That's the federal reimbursement.
Okay. So that number is one number we're concerned about. I think the schools are also concerned about that number. But the number that's even larger that concerns me more would be the reimbursement for the waiting. And if that number is $2,500 per student for that waiting, for 198,000 students, we're looking at $495 million?
For students who might not have been eligible, but received at-risk, the school district received at-risk funding anyway for those students. We estimated $38 million to $53 million in the 24th school year, which would be the overage.
That's, okay, that's the ones that,
That's the overage, right?
I was looking at, that's the total amount for the at-risk waiting.
Right.
Would be about 495, and of that, you say 53
Somewhere between 38 million and 53 million would be
would be not eligible, basically.
potentially, yes.
Thank you very much.
There is, because the federal government does reimburse potentially for students who are not eligible, there is a little bit of a federal cost as well. I think we did estimate that. I think it was around $14 million. So there is a little bit of a federal cost as well. We just weren't focused on that because we were looking at the at-risk side.
And I can tell you that I believe, Matthew, correct me if I'm wrong, last year we had $523 million in at-risk funding was allocated. It was over $500 million. Senator Holscher.
Thank you again. You know, earlier you mentioned that 73% of our schools qualify for the community eligibility provision, but it's a small number that take advantage of it. Isn't that because there's a different reimbursement rate, and then if they opt into that program, they also have to provide free breakfast? And I would imagine that could be complicated in terms of having the staffing to do the breakfast program, but isn't there some reasoning as to why that might, I guess, pose some challenges?
Yes, that's exactly it. The reimbursement rates are slightly different. There are some other things you have to do if you're a community eligibility school that you don't have to do if you are not. School districts have to weigh those things, and oftentimes they have to sit down and do the math and see which one of those things financially makes sense for them. We didn't talk to school districts about why they did or didn't, decide to be in this program, but we can definitely see within understanding the program, there are things to consider and things to weigh, and every school district gets to make that call for themselves. And so it may be that there are school districts that just, they've done the math, they've considered it, and they've just decided it doesn't work well for their district.
And our staff, quick as usual, for 2024-25, at-risk funding was at $506.7 million, so over $500 million. Any other questions for Heidi? Heidi, thank you. Great job as always.
Thank
We
you.
appreciate the information. Appreciate you being here. Committee, tomorrow we will have a hearing on a bill that requires verification of eligibility for free lunch. And then I also want to draw your attention to the reminders. Keep in mind, we're moving quickly. Keep those dates in mind if there's anything, any bills you want introduced. And let Tamara know if you have any amendments on anything as soon as possible so she can get to work on that. With that, we are adjourned.